Hello everybody and welcome to our Moving Up to Secondary School presentation. This presentation is aimed at Year 5 parents and it's an ideal opportunity for you to get to grips with all of the information that you need to know in order to ensure that your child has a smooth transition to secondary school. This presentation, this PowerPoint, will be available. It will be sent out to our parents and available on our website, along with the pack that you'll need with all of the additional information so that you know what to expect. Of course, this doesn't necessarily replace a face-to-face conversation. So if you have any concerns after watching this or any other additional questions, obviously, as always, either pop in and ask the Year 5 teachers or myself or Miss Bex, and we'd be only too happy to help. So this is obviously aimed at those children who are starting secondary school next September, so September 2023, those children who are currently in Year 5. Now, obviously, we have been in a world of coronavirus for quite some time now, but it is felt that it's unlikely that testing will be delayed this year. There might be a rate, it's still worth having that in the back of our minds that if there were to be a re-emergence of COVID, it could affect it. It has affected it over recent years. But last year went really smoothly to time, and we have no reason to anticipate that it would be any different this year. And this is the usual process that I'll be describing here. So it will be absolutely what we're expecting to happen at the current time. And this will be stuck to wherever possible. But any changes will be on the Bucks Grammar School site. So should you need to check that nothing's changed, that's the place to look. So included in this presentation is the application and the offer processes, so when to apply, how to apply, and all things like that, and then the secondary transfer test process. So if this is the first time your child will have gone, or any child of yours will have gone through the transfer test process, this will be an ideal opportunity for you to hear how it works, and then any other information that is relevant. And finally, we'll end on the admissions team contact details. So they're the people to contact if you have any concerns about your child sitting the test or, any queries. They're the people who are in charge of the test being sat. So this is the timelines and the application offer. The key message here, the absolute message that must come through this is that you have to apply in time. They do not accept any reasons why the application is late. But if the application is late, you will automatically go through to the next window where the application's open, which is after the transfer test is finished, and it causes huge amounts of stress. So one of the most important things that you need to do is apply on time. There is no extensions for that. When you make that application late, then it makes it less likely your child will get the school that is their first choice. Because if the first choice fills up in the first round, you're out of the running. So please do meet that deadline. If you live in Bucks, it's quite straightforward. You need to go to that web address, which is there between the 10th of September, that's when it opens, and the 31st of October, that's when it closes. If you live elsewhere, so if you're living in London or you're living in Hertfordshire or anywhere else in the country, you would apply through your own local authority website, obviously just stating that it's a Bucks school that you want to apply to. And all you need is an email address. That's all you need for the process. You can apply on a phone, iPad, laptop. The website works with all of those. Make a note of which email account you used and your password. That's the biggest problem we have with parents. They're coming to us saying, I don't know how I got logged in the first place. I don't know how to get in and access my account. So make a note of the email address, particularly if, like me, you've got 3 or 4 email addresses. Use an email address that you can access, even if you leave your job, even if you are no longer have access to a computer. Use that email address that you're going to still be able to access in a year's time, no matter what happens. You will be reminded if an application isn't submitted, and you can accept that place online. Okay, so you accept the place online and you see all your outcomes online. Everything is done through that portal. So it's really important you keep hold of your email address and your login details, because that's where everything is done through. When you apply online, you list up to 6 schools, okay? Include in that grammar, upper, all ability, and out of county schools. So your first choice might be Chesham Grammar. Do not fall into the trap of only putting Cheshire Grammar, because if your child fails the transfer test and you don't get through on appeal, your child will be left with a school that is out of whatever's left. Okay, so it's really important that you make sure that you put all of the schools that you'd be willing to accept there, in the order that you would prefer them to be, including local schools that you have a good chance of being offered. Okay, you will know the outcome of the secondary transfer test before you submit your preferences. Okay, so you'll know it before the 31st of October. So if your child has passed the transfer test, you'll know that by the time this deadline comes around. Similarly, if your child hasn't passed, you will know by this deadline. If you expect your child to pass the test, it's still important that you put non-grammar schools there. Similarly, if you know your child is not going to pass, or you're not going to let them sit the test, don't put grammar schools down. Okay, use your preferences for schools that you would like. The important thing here is that if you have to go to the second round, so when the first round allocations are made and your child is offered a school, if it's your third or fourth choice school and you don't like the third or fourth choice, the third or the fourth choice school, and you'd put something else, no new schools can be added. So if you take it for an example, that if I wanted my child to go to Cheshire Grammar, so I only put Cheshire Grammar, perhaps I also put Dr. Challoner's, they didn't pass the transfer test, they didn't get through on appeal, now I've accepted that, they're going to go to a local secondary school instead, I now can't add Chiltern Hills or Amersham. I can't add any new schools now. So I'm at the mercy of what's available. I have no preferences left. So you can't add schools later. So make sure you include all of the schools in the first round, just in case you need them for the second round. Because at least then you have got Chiltern Hills or Amersham or Misbourne or another school as your second preference. It makes life a lot easier for you. Make that application by the deadline. So the things to think about. So does your child need to sit or pass a test to be considered for a place at the school? So if you're asking for grammar school places, then yes, of course they do. Think about whether or not, and there are other schools as well, of course, though. So the Beaconsfield School, the Hillcrest Academy has a banding test, for example, in addition to the 11+. So make sure you know exactly what tests and what requirements there are for your child to attend that school. Do you know where your child fits on the school's admission rules? For example, looked after children are always at the top of admission rules lists, including previously looked after children. So it's important that you know that, so that you know where your child will come on the admissions list, which gives you an opportunity to see what the chances are of your child getting into that school. Many schools give priority if your child has a sibling at that school, but not all do. And some schools give priority to pupils who are in receipt of free school meals, all those entitled to pupil premium, but again, not all do. So it's worth looking at the school's admissions policy and working out what the chances are of your child getting into that school. And for some schools, you'll need to complete a supplementary form for that school. And you can find out on the Bucks website whether or not you live in catchment, which is another key decision-making factor in schools and where they allocate their places to. So transport is given to the nearest secondary school if it has to be the nearest, if you are over 3 miles away from it, or under 3 miles, but the route is an unsafe walking route. The best way, if you think you might be entitled to transport, is to get in touch with admissions and get some more information from them. There is on the website a nearest school transport checker, and that will give you routed home to school distances so that you can see whether or not you're entitled to transport. If you are qualified for a grammar school and you attend your nearest grammar school, you'll only be assisted with transport if there's no nearer secondary school. So you may not get support with the grammar school for transport if there are other schools nearby that are not grammar schools. Okay, so the offer process, this is how it works. The local authority will share information with each other. Each school preference is treated separately. So for example, if you've applied for Chiltern Hills, your child will be logged through the admissions process for Chiltern Hills at the same time as they're being logged through for Cheshire Grammar and for Amersham and all the other all 6 of the schools that you've put on that list. Schools are not told where they're placed on the preference list by the parent. So Chiltern Hills might be number 6 on your preference list, or it might be number 1. It won't know, but it will fairly go along the process to check whether or not your child is entitled to a place. All admissions authorities apply their admission rules to the children with a preference for their school, and the children are sorted into a ranked order. So the order in which they are entitled to a place in that school based on their admissions criteria that the school has set and published on its website. And then the schools tell that rank order to the council. Grammar school preferences are only offered to qualified pupils. That's scoring 121 or more, or if they have a successful selection review. Where a child can be offered more than one school place, the higher ranked preference school is offered. So if 4 of the schools come back and offer you a place, you'll only be offered the highest ranking one. So if Chesham Grammar was number 1 and you qualified through the selection review, you'll be offered Chesham Grammar School. If you didn't qualify, then you will go into the second round and you'll be offered, hopefully, your 2nd place ranking. The lower preference schools are declined, and then that vacant place is offered to another child, hence why there is a 2nd round, a 3rd, and even a 4th round. As parents decline places because they've got a higher preference, more school places become available. And that's just how the ranking system works. Children who can't be offered any of their preferences are then offered a place at the nearest school that has vacant places remaining, which is why it's so essential to get your offer in early, on time, and it's so essential that you make sure that that you put all 6 schools that you're prepared for your child to go to, because if there's nothing else there, you'll just be given whatever's left, which is unlikely to be what you want. So each year, and the local authority have asked us to say this to you, each year some children are not offered any of their preferred schools and are offered a school place that was not on their list. Now, there are reasons for this. It usually happens because they don't include their nearest or most local school or their catchment school among their preferences. These are the schools that have the most chance of getting into. So leaving the nearest or catchment school out raises the risk of not being offered a local school. If you think about it, if you're in the catchment area for a school and you put lots of other schools that you're not in the catchment area for, you're unlikely to get in on admissions criteria, which means then the local school will fill up and you won't have a place in any local school. Only giving one preference, even if you live next door to a school or having a sibling already there, still include the other local schools that would be acceptable to you as a lower preference. That reduces the risk of not being offered a local school. Okay. Then the offer day. So the offer day is the 1st of March, and you will be sent an email. And then you can log on using the email address and the password that you used when you first selected your schools to accept the place online. If you applied by post, then you'll be emailed for the 1st of March. All applicants are automatically added to waiting lists for higher preferences that couldn't be offered, but for which you were qualified. So if you get your place at your 2nd place school, you can accept that place, but you will also be automatically on the waiting list for your 1st place school in case a place becomes available. You can register an appeal, of course, and you will have 14 days to accept the offer. So then after offer day, you can appeal for any school you've been refused. So if you would like to, this includes where your preference is grammar school and your child has not qualified. So if you know you're going for a selection review, and you're appealing, you can appeal for your grammar school place, and you will automatically be added to the waiting list for any school on your application above the school that's been offered. So the appeals, they are heard by a panel of 3 people. It's 3 panel members and a clerk who records the appeal and the decision. The panel members will not be connected to the school involved in the appeal or with the decision not to offer your child a place. So they're completely independent of both of those systems. You usually will need to attend the appeal in person, but it can be held in your absence. Obviously, you have a better chance if you go. These days, at the moment, it's likely to be held remotely via Teams. It's just so much more time efficient. So the application summary. So summary of everything I've said. Apply by midnight on the 31st of October. And to not do that will mean that your child is unlikely to get a local school. So do not be late in your application. Apply online if you live in Bucks, your LA, your local authority from wherever you're living if you don't. List schools in true preference order, including grammar and upper schools if your child is sitting the test. Don't include grammar schools if they're not. Don't only include grammar schools if they are, because they may not pass the test, they may not get through on selection review, and then you will not have a local school to fall back on. Consider putting your catchment local nearest school. So important. Your Chiltern Hills, for example, might not be your first choice, but it is oversubscribed. It is hugely popular. So if you don't get through into a grammar school and you don't put Chiltern Hills, you're not going to get it in the second round. You're very unlikely to get it because it will be full. So even as your local school, you might not get it because other people will oversubscribe it. So think about your local school and whether or not you'd be accepted, whether that would be easier for you than ending up at Chalfont Community College, for example, if you need a secondary school that's local. Be realistic, understand the rules, consider your transport. As I said, there is that transport checker on the Bucks website. Visit the schools if you're permitted, obviously COVID notwithstanding, but there's no substitute for going around a school with your child and seeing if it's right for them. And don't rely on the opinions of others, because a school that wasn't right for somebody else's child, it doesn't mean that it's not right for yours. And you often don't know the background to why it wasn't right for another person's child. So go and see the school for yourself. Meet the teachers, see the children, talk to people there and find out what it feels like for your child. Okay, on to the transfer test. So loved by some, loathed by many, and certainly, you know, a difficult time for the children as they try to do their best to get into the school that they want. So the secondary transfer test is simply done to determine whether or not a child is suited to a Buckinghamshire grammar school. It is produced by GL Assessment. They've produced them for many years for Bucks Grammars. It does it on behalf of the 13 grammar schools. So the test is the same for all 13 grammar schools. And there is a link there to tell you more about the test. It's worth adding here that the primary schools are not permitted to support children in the process of getting ready for the tests. To do so would mean you would no longer be allowed to be a testing centre. That privilege would be withdrawn from us. We are meant to be completely impartial, so we cannot give grammar transfer test practices, we cannot give out papers, we cannot give any support whatsoever. It is entirely down to the child's ability and attainment on that day. I know lots of parents do pay for tuition, and that's entirely within your remit to do so. Schools are not allowed to do that. So this is the testing timeline as it stands to run at the moment. So the familiarisation booklet will be posted to your home address in July. That's an example paper with some ideas on what sorts of questions your child is likely to get. The practice test is run on the 13th of September. That's run in school. Children sit together in the hall under test conditions to sit that test. And then the actual real transfer test is sat on the 15th of September. The results will be released on the 14th of October, which gives you plenty of time to get into that deadline of the 31st of October. So all being well, your child sits the test and passes, they get over 121, you know you can apply for a grammar school on the 31st of October. Should your child be within that gap, so that it's possible they might get through and on a selection review process, you can still apply for grammar schools. On appeal, you might get in if they get through on the review. But yeah, bearing in mind that the selection review process is tough, and it's not many children that get through that. The school place offers come through, as I said before, on the 1st of March, and secondary school obviously starts on varying dates and varying different schools in September 2023. So COVID should not impact the test this year. It didn't impact the test last year. We expect the test to take place in September. However, obviously we'll be guided by the government when it comes to that time. So we can't promise that those dates won't change. Children always sit the practice test 2 days before the transfer test. Gives them the chance, even though if they've had tuition, it still gives them a chance to sit there and have a go at the test around their peers in test conditions. Any changes will be on that website. So I suggest that if you're a parent who wants their child to go to grammar school and who is, you know, anticipating the transfer test, that you keep an eye on that website so that you know if anything changes. Do children have to? No, they don't. Children do not have to sit the transfer test. They only sit it if you want them to. It's really important to remember that grammar schools do not suit all children. So you really do need to think about your knowledge of your child and whether or not sitting the test is going to be a positive experience for them. If they haven't had tuition and they haven't seen a transfer test before, it's likely that it could be quite daunting for them. So think about it, have a look at the familiarisation booklet, and knowing what you know about your child, consider whether or not it's right for them. We will ask you, and the only way, if we don't hear from you, your child will sit the test. We ask that you put it in writing if your child does not want to sit the test, or you do not want your child to sit the test, okay? So if you send an email to the school office or send us a note in your child's book bag, we will withdraw them from the test. But without that piece of paper or that email, your child will sit the test. And the child will, if they're withdrawn from the test, obviously they'll be supervised and given alternative arrangements will be made. It's really important that you think about your child's attainment to date. To get through on a selection review, your child really needs to have been greater depth since year 3 and possibly even before. Okay, your child needs to be working at a significantly higher standard than their peers. Okay, so it's really worth thinking about that knowledge you have of your child and whether or not they are likely to get through on the selection review in case they don't pass the 11 plus. If your child has SEN, then of course they can still set the test. SEN children have passed the test before, and I'm sure they will in the future as well. SEN doesn't mean that your child hasn't got the attainment level suitable for a grammar school. It just means that they have slightly more difficult challenges regarding learning, but that doesn't mean they can't go to grammar school. Just remember that grammar school is a much more high-pressured environment. So you've just got to be aware of your child, really, and what the suitability of their learning styles are. Head teachers, myself, we're asked to put a recommendation in for all children. And we do this before they've sat the test. We do it in conjunction with class teachers who know them best. Teachers know them better than I do. And there are 3 levels of recommendation. These are the recommendation levels that we allow. So 1, exceptionally able, so very highly recommended. And we listen very carefully to those words, exceptionally able, and so very highly recommended. That's number 1. That's really what you need to get through on selection review. 2, very able, so recommended without reservation. Still a very high bar, but less likely to get through on selection review. And number 3, recommended with reservation. The head teacher must be prepared to say what that reservation is based on. Anybody below that, we don't give them a ranking. Okay, so children are their ranking is based on their academic attainment and their academic attainment only, and not their academic attainment now, their academic attainment for the whole of Key Stage 2. Because the 4th recommendation is not recommended for grammar school. Okay, so that's just, we don't give them a ranking. So combined together, those are given a score which suggests the suitability rating for grammar school, whether or not that child is suitable. So the secondary transfer test measures 3 things: verbal, so English and verbal reasoning, maths, various areas of maths at a higher attainment level than you would see at Key Stage 2, and non-verbal skills, so non-verbal and spatial reasoning. It is not based around the national curriculum. It is not based around things that they have already done in school. These tests are much more akin to a kind of potentiality IQ test type question level. It's really important you look at the familiarisation booklet so that you get an idea of what those questions are like. It will give you examples of questions, and it includes example questions with answers that you can do with your child, perhaps while you sit together and you decide whether or not your child is right for the test. It will not be looked at in school. It cannot be looked at in school. We're not allowed to do that. Something you will need to do at home with your child. And there is more free familiarisation on the GLA assessment website. So have a look. and, you know, come to a mutual decision about whether or not it's right for your child to go for transfer testing and grammar school. So on the test days, there are 2 papers, 15-minute break between them. Each paper is about an hour, and the practice is a bit shorter. It tends to be about 45 minutes. It runs to a CD. So the CD, we press play, and it works through, and it pauses for the children to do their work, and then it speaks again. We are not allowed to pause the CD for anything. So, you know, a fire alarm potentially would be the only thing really. So children need, if they go to the toilet, they miss the CD does not pause. So it's important that children can do the test at the right speed to be able to keep up with the CD. Verbal skills paper is taken first, and the maths and non-verbal was taken second. They don't mark the practice tests. That's just literally a familiarisation exercise. If your child is ill on either the practice or the transfer test day, they can sit the test later. Children shouldn't sit the test when they're not well, even if they want to, because it won't necessarily stack up in the selection review. You know, if you say my child wasn't very well, that isn't necessarily going to make much sway, because they've warned you in advance that ill children shouldn't sit the test. So if we think your child is poorly, we'll ask them not to sit the test, and they can sit it on another day. If your child misses a few days, when they come back to school, they will sit the practice test first, and then they will sit the transfer test. We do it in the same way, with a gap between them, as we would had your child be in school. And you'll be advised of those new dates for the test before they sit them. So if you think something has affected your child's performance, and this could be a myriad of things, of course, you need to let me know on the test day, and also then collect evidence. For example, a doctor's letter. You can't, you know, you can understand the very good reasons why you can't suddenly say something weeks ahead of time. So come to me on the day and say, there was a loud bang, this didn't work, something was wrong, he was worried about this, he wasn't feeling well, he went home and he was really ill, so that we know on the day, so that we log it, okay, and then collect evidence. And then once you have the test results, you have to wait and see how they've done. Talk to me then. Once they've done the test, you've got the results, then we can have a conversation depending on where their score is sitting. Special arrangements. So testing arrangements can be adjusted for children with special educational needs. Discuss that now, really. That needs to be talked about now. So get in touch with us if you think your child might be entitled to extra time, you'd like to apply for that. And they need to be completed as soon as possible now. So please get in touch really quickly now. Special arrangements are not decided by the school. They're arranged by a panel of experts in SEND and an educational psychologist. So that's why we need to get the paperwork in quickly, so that panel can sit and make the decision. We are asked, as I've explained a few times, not to tutor or coach the children in school prior to the test. It's designed to enable all children to demonstrate their academic potential without the need for excessive preparation. So we are not allowed to support children with the transfer testing, unfortunately. That's just the way that the grammar schools would like this to be organised. So how do they mark it? The completed answer sheets are machine marked. They get marks for each correct answer. Marks are not deducted for incorrect answers. They just don't get scored. And each pupil will have 3 raw scores. Then those raw scores are standardised and weighted against their age to produce the transfer test score. So their age is taken into account, because obviously some children will be a year younger than other children. So that's all taken into account. And it's weighted as follows. So verbal is 50% of the score, maths 25%, and non-verbal 25%. The qualifying score is a minimum of 121, and scores can go anywhere from 60 to 170. The highest we had last year was about 155, but 121 is the pass mark. So results and qualification, 14th of October, you'll get an email. Test contents are confidential to parents and child. 37% of all children who sat the test last year scored 121 or more. So that's kind of the rough gauge of how many children passed the test. If your child hasn't qualified and you still think that a grammar school place would be appropriate, you can either ask for a selection review or just appeal. The selection review process involves me and you having a conversation, us deciding together whether or not there's sufficient evidence for us to go to selection review, and then we will, if that is decided that yes we do, I will write a letter of recommendation supporting your child for a place at grammar school. If the selection review is positive, your child will qualify. If the selection review is not successful, then you still have the right to appeal. You can go straight to appeal without a selection review as well. Grammar schools do recognise that there may be circumstances that impacted children's performance, and they do, listen to those reasons at the selection review process. The panel, though, is looking for evidence that your child has consistent educational ability that is relevant and at the right level for grammar school, but they just underperformed on the day. So if your child has greater depth assessments since the start of year 3 and even before, and are absolutely academically way ahead of their peers, but they underperformed on the day, that's more likely to get you somewhere, as opposed to a child who is working at expected standard all the way through, sort of, not quite some years and a little bit ahead on other years. That would suggest, wouldn't it, that they haven't underperformed on the day, they've just performed in line with their attainment level. So that, it really is important that you think carefully about this. There are reasons why your child might underperform, but in order to convince someone of that, you do need to have had evidence of high performance prior to the test. Panels sit December to January, and it's panelled by head teachers, grammar school head teachers and a primary head teacher. And then the decision will be included in the 1st of March allocation. So if you're successful, your 1st of March allocation of secondary school will include that information. So you will have qualified for grammar school if you're successful. At the end of the process and following selection reviews, 35% of the cases qualified. So, 35% of selection reviews are successful. So there is hope. So if you go through selection review and you don't get there and you're refused and your child didn't pass 11+, you can then appeal. It's a non-qualified appeal. You will need to show that your child's case was not fair, consistent and objective. Okay. And if they are successful, you can put your full academic case to the independent appeal panel. If the child does pass at that place, at that stage, they are only qualified for that school. So if you launch an appeal for Dr. Challoner's or for Cheshire Grammar, you've only qualified for that school. You can't change it to another school. So appeals are heard after the 1st of March. The drawback of this is that most schools are already full at this point. So you'd have to prove academic potential and give reasons why you believe your child should be given a place above PAN. In other words, the school takes them on above numbers in order to give your child a place. So it's a much tougher challenge, really, to get them in on the non-qualified appeal. In 2021, the children that went to grammar school appeal without a selection review, 48 appeal cases were submitted, 2 were successful. So out of 48, there was 2 that got in. Okay, and then we have more information. So these are all the bits of information I said I would give you at the end. So different websites, a link there to find school open event dates, and by the end of August, there will be more information on the council's website. So if you access this on the actual PowerPoint, which I will put on the website, you'll be able to click on those links and to contact the admissions team. So there's a link there to the admissions team on the web, and then there is a contact us form there that you can access to ask any questions that you might have. So I hope that that has been helpful, and I hope that that's given you some of the answers to the questions you might have had about selection review and about admission to secondary school for next September. Obviously, if you have any other questions, contact us in school and let us know, and we can answer all of your questions. And if not, we can find out where we can get the answers. Just the one thing I would urge and remind you about from this entire presentation is do not miss that deadline. To do so almost guarantees your child will not get the first place that they would have liked and go to secondary school with their peers. So hit that deadline. Make sure you choose your schools wisely. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, and don't listen to other people's opinions about secondary schools. Go and visit them for yourself with your child and find out if that school is right for you and your child. And finally, when that familiarisation booklet comes through, spend some time going through it with your child and think about whether or not grammar school is right for your child. If it is, fantastic, plug away, and you know, we will make sure that conditions are absolutely right for your child to be able to be successful at during the transfer test in September. But if you don't want your child to sit the test, please let us know in writing and we'll make sure your child is withdrawn. And finally, if you think your child is entitled to additional time or other support during the transfer test, let us know now as soon as possible. Let Ms. Armour or myself know, and we will arrange for that. We will look at how we apply for that on your behalf or with you, whichever, depends on which route we need to take for that, but we will be in touch with you. So just drop us an email or give us a ring and we'll start that process for you. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.